Good morning. I had a moment with your selection of worship songs this morning. Did you pick those? Yeah. Of sitting in a circle with you and your guitar. And Lish and I served in prison together for many years. And we had a woman in our group. I was not going to say anything about this, but I just couldn't not. We had a woman in our group, Dana, and she had a long, long history of meth addiction, started using methamphetamine with her parents when she was a middle schooler. And Dana loved to sing God's praises, louder than the 10, 15, 20 women, however many had gathered that night. And she's really bad. Like, can't carry a tune, so bad. But when that woman stood up to sing God's praises for her deliverance, she's been out for, close to 10 years now. And I see her on Facebook and she's thriving. And when she would sing, so off key, it was so inspiring. You couldn't help but be drawn in. So Lish and I did our best to maintain a melody everybody else could follow. Dana was a lot of competition. Anyway, side note, what wasn't in the notes here, but that was awesome. I want to thank Pastor Chris for allowing me to share this message with you this morning. This particular passage of text is a very special one to me, and I love it because it so vividly shows us how never giving up matters, how belonging and connection can be a powerful source for healing. I think this text is a little picture of what God is doing in all places and all circumstances, the business of redeeming, restoring, and renewing all of creation. So we see in Revelation a new heavens and new earth. There are no tears. There is no injustice. There is no prideful backstabbing and all the things that we as human beings are so prone to do. And so let's read this scripture together. This translation is kind of a, how do I say this? I've taken a lot of license. It's an amalgamation of the Message and the Voice and the NRSV, actually. So. Mark 5:21 through 34. After Jesus crossed over by boat, a large crowd met him at the seaside, and one of the meeting place leaders named Jairus came. And when he saw Jesus, he fell to his knees, desperately begging, "My dear daughter is at death's door. Come and lay hands on her so that she will get well and live." So Jesus went with him, with the whole crowd tagging along, pushing along, and jostling him. And in the crowd pressing around Jesus, there was a woman who had suffered continuous bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered greatly, and although she had spent all of her money on doctors, she'd only gotten worse. She'd heard of Jesus, so she snuck up behind him in the crowd, and she reached out her hand to touch his cloak, and she was thinking to herself, if I can just put a finger on his robe, I will get well. And in that moment that she did it, the flow of blood stopped and she felt it in her body. And she knew in that moment that her plague was over and done with. And at the same moment, Jesus felt power discharging from him. So he turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my robe?" The disciples laughed at him. "What are you talking about? With this crowd pushing and jostling you, you're asking who touched me? Dozens have touched you." But he went on asking and looking around, "Who touched my robe?" And finally, the woman, knowing what had happened, knowing she was the one, she stepped up in fear and trembling, and she fell to her knees before him, and she gave him the whole story. And Jesus responded to her, daughter, you took a risk of faith and now you are healed and whole. Live well, live blessed, be healed. Like most Christians who have been around the church for a while, I have heard this passage preached many times, usually in a couplet. The story of this woman and her 12 years of bleeding, and the story of Jairus' daughter and Jesus raising her from the dead, who just so happened to be 12 years old. But since we already had a sermon in this series on healing this summer, on Jairus' daughter, I'm going to focus just on this woman who had been bleeding. So who is she, and what do we know about her? Well, she had a problem. She was bleeding, like female bleeding, in case you missed that. And many translations call this an issue of blood, to be nice. But we live in a day when female health is more openly discussed, and I would bet in a congregation of this size that we females gathered here today we could probably check all the boxes of things that are far too common to women. Endometriosis, infertility, unplanned pregnancies, abortion, complicated pregnancies, miscarriages, irregular periods, menopause, sexually transmitted infections, cancer, and the list goes on and on. In our day, about 10% of women suffer from some kind of nonstop uterine bleeding at some point in their lives. And where we simply go to the doctor, armed with some very important knowledge that we gained from Google, we expect relief. She was left to suffer. And unlike us, who would simply learn to live with this kind of condition once the doctor had ruled out any sort of life-threatening complications, she was desperate. This problem would not merit desperation in us today. So why did it merit desperation for her? And to really understand her desperation, we need to get back to Leviticus 15, where we learned that any bodily discharge from a man or a woman would render that person unclean. God created our bodies, and in Leviticus, God speaks quite frankly about our body fluids. The law was clear about how to handle women and their issues of blood. In these purity laws, what was considered clean and unclean were an incredibly important part of what it meant to be one of God's holy, chosen people. So important that when one was deemed unclean, they were separated from the community until the source of their uncleanliness had subsided. Then they would complete various purity rituals that were prescribed by the law in Leviticus. But in Leviticus, God does not address this issue of bleeding nonstop for many years. Everything in this passage assumes that whatever had rendered a man or a woman unclean in the way of bodily fluids would run its course. That person could then follow the law for how to be restored to community, and life goes on. But without having clear instruction for what to do in this kind of case, the teachers of the law in Jesus' day decided to fill in the blanks themselves. She was to be treated like she was on her period, and she could come back to the fold when this period stopped. Bummer for her, it hadn't stopped for 12 years. It wasn't stopping. But the law is the law. No critical thinking, no context, no compassion. In the case of a normal period, the woman was to wait 7 days after her bleeding stopped and then take 2 birds to the priests to make sacrifices for her. One of those birds was for a sin offering, so that the priest could make atonement for her uncleanliness. God doesn't say so in Leviticus, but the clear implication is that the cause of this bleeding was a result of sin. She was not allowed to attend synagogue, which was the center of their village life. She would have been separated from her husband and her family, or they too would have become unclean simply by association with her. She was separated from everyone who was important to her for 12 years, like a leper, except that she didn't even have the comfort of a leper colony in which to live. All indicators are that she was utterly alone in her suffering, ashamed for her sinfulness, and desperate for healing. In verse 26, Mark tells us that she had endured much under physicians and that she'd spent all her money in attempts to get well and cure this condition. But what did these doctors actually do for her? The ancient world didn't understand hormonal cycles like we do. Ancient doctors couldn't just prescribe a little estrogen or progesterone to stop the bleeding, or do a hysterectomy and remove the source of the bleeding. Heck, they didn't even have a basic understanding of human anatomy. That really didn't even come until the Renaissance. So being curious, once a nurse, always a nurse, I decided to investigate. And in my research, I found an old commentary from 1832. And in the commentary, there are quotes from a rabbi from the 2nd century. And this rabbi describes in detail what ancient Jewish doctors would have prescribed this woman during this time. It's quite interesting. Starts out, now this was written in 1832, and in this commentary it's written in Old English. Yeah, I'm a geek who likes things like John Donne poetry and whatnot. Hang with me here. Take of gum Alexandra, of alum, and of crocus hortensis, the weight of a zuzi each. Let them be bruised together and given in wine to the woman who hath the issue of blood. Sounds kind of medicinal. But if this fail, take of Persian onions, 9 logs, boil them in wine, and give it to her to drink. And then say, arise from thy flux, which is Old English for leave flow of blood. So if the medicine doesn't work, we now change up the formula. We got onions instead of zuzis of hortensis. And she drinks that, and then we proclaim, leave flow of blood. But should this fail, set her in a place where 2 ways meet, let her hold a cup of wine, lots of wine in this, and let somebody come behind and affright her and shout, arise from thy flux. So if the command itself doesn't work, then we frighten her, like that old cure for hiccups. Remember that one? Come up behind somebody and scare them, and the hiccups will stop. The only problem is the person knows they have the hiccups and you're in the room. This poor woman, drink the wine, take the herbs, do all these things, and it didn't work. And when none of that didn't work, they had a last-ditch effort. And I literally mean ditch. The doctor would dig 7 trenches, and she would walk up and down the trenches, and the doctor would follow behind, demanding, leave flow of blood, up and down and up and down. No wonder she was desperate. She spent all her money on these cures, and she was still bleeding. She was still ostracized from her community. She was still alone, living with the shame of believing that all of this was a result of sin. Can you imagine her prayers? Lord, please, just tell me what I did wrong. I'll go to the priest. I'll atone for my sin, and then you can heal me. You'd think after 12 years of this, she would give up in a despondent depression. But she hears about Jesus, and she has hope. So she sneaks down to the seaside, and she weasels her way into this jostling crowd where she's not supposed to be. And she boldly touches his garment. She touches the garment of the one she is convinced who can actually heal her. And it works. She feels it immediately in her body. Now all she has to do is slip out of the crowd, wait her 7 days, go to the priest with her birds, come up with some story about how she got healed that doesn't entail breaking the law and being in a crowd, touching the clothing of a popular religious teacher. Problem's fixed, except that Jesus had something else in mind. Feels the power go out of him and he wants answers. And there's a bit of controversy about verse 30. Biblical scholars disagree. Some say Jesus knew who touched him all along, and others say that he didn't actually know it in that moment. I say it does not matter. If it mattered, Mark would have told us. What matters is that this passage shows us that Jesus is bent on calling out one who has been healed. When she falls before him trembling, because he might just command the crowd to stone her right then and there. He, she, and the crowd and the disciples and everyone on that beach get a big surprise. He does not call her a sinner for breaking the law. He doesn't call her a lawbreaker at all. Instead, he compassionately calls her daughter. He commends her faith, and he proclaims her well right there in front of everyone. He uses the term daughter to affirm her identity as a daughter of Abraham. It's a common way where we might say brother and sister in Christ. To be a son or a daughter said, you are a true member of the holy chosen people of God. The interesting thing is that he calls her daughter right there in front of Jairus, a leader in their synagogue, who is desperately waiting for Jesus to get back on task and get to his house and heal his daughter. You know, Jesus could have said to her, you're cured. Go to the priest. I fixed you. It's all good. But he carefully uses the word healed. It's a much more powerful word in Hebrew and English. Greek and English. Sorry, wrong part of the Bible. It's rich in meaning. Cured means the sickness is gone. Healed means to become healthy again, to be put right, to be restored. One of the definitions in Webster's dictionary is to restore to original purity. He restores her body and he restores her to her community. She'd been thrown away for 12 years of bleeding, living separately from everyone else. That made her easy to forget. Can you just imagine when he calls her out of that jostling crowd, how many people in that village? You think Newberg's a small town. Try traveling with Jesus back in the first century. Small towns, everybody knew everybody. And she probably fell down before him and somebody thought, oh yeah, her. Didn't she used to live here? He knew someone had been healed, and he wasn't going to allow that to happen in secret. He sees her, and he wants everyone on that beach to see her. Roughly 15 years ago, I found myself sitting in a seminary classroom. My career as a healthcare IT consultant had blown up as part of the 2008 crash, and I decided to go to seminary. When you're in your 40s and you no longer have a job, but you're doing fine financially, going to seminary makes all the sense in the world, right? And on that memorable day in October of 2009, we had a guest speaker come to our class, a woman named Fran, and she spoke to us. The class was on pastoring women in crisis. So we had various guest speakers, and on this day, Fran came in, and she had 5 women who had done time in prison. They shared their stories. And at that moment in my life, I had never heard women speak so openly, so vulnerably about their mistakes. I came from a church background where women's job were to make your husband look good and make your children look good and make sure you look good. And it was profound for me to hear these stories. I'd never heard women share so openly and so vulnerably about how they had harmed their children, their families, their communities, how they struggled daily to put faith over their fears, how they felt utterly alone in their suffering, until some prison ministry volunteers shared the love and acceptance of Jesus and called them into community. What we did on Wednesday nights, Lish and I might say, oh, we lead a Bible study, we lead a worship service. They called that church. This is my church. And in prison, there was church pretty much every night of the week. And it was common, as we all say, oh, what church do you go to? Oh, I go to this one on Wednesday. Belonging. Hearing those stories in that classroom, I had a profound moment of God's voice saying, go to prison. I'd never really thought of anybody in prison. Those people were invisible to me. And when God said, go, that drab classroom, nasty ceiling tiles, irritating fluorescent lights, became holy ground. A calling was born. A calling that would come to define my life and by extension the lives of my husband and my children. A calling that these years later has greatly enriched our lives with family we never could have imagined. And I'm fond of saying that proximity is the key to understanding. And becoming proximate to people that were formerly invisible to me opened a Pandora's box of learning about the injustice and profiteering that is woven into our criminal legal system. And once you see something, you can never unsee it again. And amidst the incredible injustice that I witness and I yell about at the dinner table, and Dave and I lose it over, what we've also seen is incredible healing. Incredible healing. Addiction, mental unhealth, all the things are healed. One thing that Dave and I love about worshiping in this church is that weekly practice of sharing prayer requests, praying, and naming, which is a way of seeing the people that we pray for. But do we remember those who are easy to forget? Those who've become invisible? Think about it. How much did any of us really know about the plight of immigrant families before this immigration crisis hit the news? I didn't know. I didn't know families were being separated. I didn't know children were being sent to kiddie jail simply because their parents didn't have proper documentation to be in this congregation. To be in this country. And if you remember your Psychology 101 class, you might remember that guy Maslow. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, ring a bell? That little pyramid? Right above food, clothing, and shelter. Safety is what? Belonging. Belonging. I gotta be honest though. Creating spaces for belonging is never easy. We've all been shaped by our modern culture and our modern ways of living. We live in a time when the norm is keep your head down, do your job, come home from work to unlimited channels of entertainment, go to church with people who look like you, believe like you, and let's all keep ourselves clean from those who might taint our ordered lives with their messiness. The messiness of poverty, the messiness of mental unhealth, the messiness of addiction, the messiness of stories, childhood trauma, hunger, abuse, violence. Sometimes it's downright chaotic. And this journey has often rendered me feeling guilty and ashamed for the blessed life that I lead, the privileged life that I lead. It's often rendered me feeling confused about where do you even start in a system that is so big, so complex, and so cruel to the people that Jesus names in Matthew 25, the sick, the hungry, houseless, naked, and imprisoned. I think that's why this woman is so inspiring to me. She had every right to give up, to just say, screw it, I'm done. I am done. I've tried, game over. But she kept the faith. And when she heard about Jesus, despite everything stacked against her in a Pharisaical legal system, she broke the law. And she was healed and restored. The Pharisees were obsessed with the letter of the law. Any time we are obsessed with keeping the rules, we will find there is a void of love. It's always void. The letter of the law crushes out the spirit of a loving God whose plan has always been to seek and to save and redeem that which has been lost. And had there been Pharisees on that beach that day, I'm pretty sure they would have started the chant, "Stone her," just like they chanted, "Crucify him." Obsession with the rules is always void of love. And if the greatest commandments are to love God with all that we are and to love our neighbors as ourselves, we got to start asking, like so many asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? And then add, and how do I love them? In my experience, loving neighbors means first, you gotta know your neighbors. See your neighbors. Hear their stories. And I'm not saying that everyone is called to prison ministry or reentry work or advocacy and policy work. In fact, if you ever thought you might be called to that, I'd say, oh, please run. But everyone can pray for God to make a way to know the people among you so that you can see them, serve them, and pray for them. Let's go deeper than the news. Let's ask God for eyes to see those who are invisible amongst us and for ways that we can create the kind of belonging where healing happens. And it'll mean something different for every one of us. For Dave and me, it's meant opening our home. We're extroverts. I like to cook. Come on down. Patio's always open in the summer. We don't even know who's showing up half the time. For Dave and me, it's meant opening our home, and for me, it's meant fighting the impact of mass incarceration on our neighbors and our neighborhoods. And Dave works in the child welfare system, doing his best to bring belonging and goodness to people who are caught in a web of a system that wants to keep their children safe while they struggle with their addictions and their mental health and their anger and their violence. That's not for everybody. For some of us, it means volunteering with Love Inc., serving in one of our community dinners, advocating with Unidos or PFLAG. For some, it will mean writing checks to support the works of organizations who create space for belonging and healing, like the Community Wellness Collective here in Newberg. And for all of us, it means praying. Praying, praying, praying. I can't begin to tell you how this will work out in your own life, but I can confidently say God has a call on your life, and it may not be a profound experience in an ugly seminary classroom, but if you ask, you will receive. May you answer the call when it comes. Amen.